Chapter 1. The Law of Human Gravity. There is an invisible law operating in every room you've ever walked into, in every conversation you've ever had, in every decision you've ever made without realizing why. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for attention. But it is always there, shaping behavior, bending choices, pulling people toward one another or silently pushing them away. It is older than written language, older than empires, older than the first spark of fire carved out of stone by human hands. And if you learn to understand it, if you learn to command it, it will change your life. This law is influence, not manipulation, not performance, not tactics dressed in desperation, but real influence, the ability to make people trust you before they have a reason to feel your presence before you speak, to follow your lead even before they understand where you're going. Influence is gravity. It pulls people toward you not because of what you say, but because of who you are when you say nothing. And the truth is, you are always influencing, whether you intend to or not. Every breath you take, every choice you make, every subtle gesture, your energy is broadcasting. Your state is contagious. You are either a signal of confidence, clarity, and inner alignment, or a frequency of fear, fragmentation, and doubt. People don't respond to words. They respond to who is speaking the words. They respond to congruence. Think about the great figures of history. The ones who could walk into a room and change its temperature. Lincoln, silent but unshakable. Mandela, composed and unwavering after years in a prison designed to crush identity. Eleanor Roosevelt, who redefined the power of a woman's voice not by aggression, but by steady conviction. These people didn't dominate. They resonated. They didn't demand influence, they became worthy of it. And this is where the modern world has gotten it backwards. Today, everyone wants to go viral. Everyone wants attention. Everyone wants followers, but few are willing to lead themselves first. Influence is not something you acquire through hacks or branding tricks. It is something you embody. You don't build influence by trying to be impressive. You build it by becoming real. You build it by learning the most ancient truth of psychology, that trust is not logical. It is emotional. And emotion, at its root, is not language. It is frequency. It is the language beneath the words. It is the feeling people get in your presence that says, this person knows who they are. And that feeling is rare. Because most people are performing. Most people are walking around trying to be liked, trying to be safe, trying not to lose approval. But you cannot lead from that place. You cannot influence from that place. Because people will feel the fracture, the dissonance between the image and the essence. Real influence begins with internal integrity. The alignment between your values and your behavior. Between your thoughts and your tone. Between what you believe and how you live. And when that alignment is felt, even subconsciously, people lean in. Because it is safe. Because it is certain. Because it is rare. Certainty is the foundation of trust. Not arrogance. Not blind confidence. But embodied certainty. The kind that is earned. The kind that radiates from someone who has done the internal excavation required to know who they are, what they stand for, and why they will not be moved. You don't learn that in books. You don't fake it on camera. You build it through trial. Through solitude. Through facing your own chaos and coming out of it with something coherent to offer the world. Because people don't follow credentials. They follow coherence. Look at Martin Luther King Jr., a man without political power, without economic leverage, without institutional backing. And yet when he spoke, nations shifted. Not because his words were clever, but because his energy carried the weight of truth. That is what people trust. Not performance. Conviction. Influence is not about domination. It is about calibration. It is about becoming so clear in who you are that other people's confusion begins to organize itself around your presence. That is what real leadership is. That is what real influence does. You walk into a chaotic room and you do not mirror the chaos. You become the order. You become the clarity. You become the center of gravity, and others, often without knowing why, begin to orbit around you. But to become that person, to become a source of trust in a world drowning in noise, you must go deeper than surface skills. You must master your state. Your nervous system must become the anchor. Your body must become the messenger of congruence. Your voice must carry not just data, but energetic precision. And that means doing the work most people avoid, the emotional work, the psychological work, the spiritual work. Because people do not remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. And that feeling is shaped in the split second before you speak. It is shaped in the posture of your presence, in the rhythm of your breath, in the stillness behind your eyes. It is shaped by whether you are trying to perform, or whether you are rooted in something real. So this is where we begin, not with tips, not with tricks, not with strategies to get people to do what you want. That is manipulation. That is control. And both are short-lived. We begin with truth. We begin with you. Who are you when there is nothing to prove? Who are you when no one is watching? What is your presence built on? Memory or vision? Fear or clarity? Reaction or intention? Because people feel what you're built on. They may not be able to explain it. They may not be able to articulate it. But they will respond to it. And this is the law of human gravity. You don't pull people with pressure. You pull them with presence. When you become immovable, others move toward you. When you stop trying to be liked, people begin to respect you. When you stop trying to fit in, you become the one who redefines the room. And that's what we're building. Not tactics. Not surface charisma. But resonance. Gravitas. Integrity. Because when your internal world becomes coherent, your external influence becomes inevitable. This is where real influence begins. Chapter 2. Mindset, the internal climate people trust without knowing why. Mindset is not just a motivational buzzword. It is not something you read about once, post on your timeline, or recite in the mirror for 5 minutes a day. Mindset is not about hype. It is not about being positive. It is not about optimism for its own sake. Mindset is infrastructure. It is the unseen architecture of your entire experience. It is the climate of your internal world, and people can feel that climate before they hear a single word you speak. You've felt it yourself. You've walked into a room and known, without being told, that someone is calm, or chaotic, or dangerous, or powerful, or desperate. There were no signs, no explanations, no data. Just something in the air. That is mindset. And when you begin to understand that your inner world is broadcasting your truth louder than your voice ever could, you start to take it seriously. You stop decorating the outside of the house and start reinforcing the foundation. Mindset is not an accessory. It is the very thing people are reading when they look at you. Not your face. Not your title. Your state. They're scanning for congruence. For consistency. For certainty. Because most people's minds are in conflict with themselves. Most people say one thing, feel another, and act out a third. And that fragmentation is visible. You can see it in their eyes. You can feel it in their handshake. You can hear it in the pauses between their words. But someone with a forged mindset, someone who has met themselves in the mirror, someone who has faced their own insecurities and forged clarity through them, that person emits a different signal. Their mind doesn't panic in the unknown. Their emotions don't hijack the moment. Their body doesn't signal threat when there is no threat. And that creates a rare phenomenon in human interaction: safety. Because here's the truth few people understand. Influence does not begin with admiration. It begins with safety. People don't follow you because they're impressed. They follow you because they trust you. And trust is not built through perfection. It is built through consistency, calmness, and emotional regulation. If your mindset is chaotic, if your thoughts are a battlefield, if your emotions are unchecked and your reactions uncontrolled, people may like you, but they won't follow you. Because the first law of leadership, whether in a boardroom, a family, a friendship, or a movement, is this: can I trust you to be stable when I'm not? That's what people are looking for. They are subconsciously asking, if things go wrong, will you collapse? Will you panic? Will you shift blame? Or will you be the one who remains composed, anchored, clear? That clarity, that steadiness, is not something you learn in a crisis. It is something you build before the storm. It is forged through repetition, not of thoughts, but of disciplines. Morning after morning, thought after thought, decision after decision, You are conditioning your nervous system to respond from intention, not from reactivity. Your mindset is your command center. It's where your thoughts meet your values, where your perspective is formed, where meaning is assigned. And most importantly, it's where others are constantly evaluating whether you are operating from a place of grounded power or emotional chaos. And make no mistake, your mindset is not hidden. It leaks into every word you say. It shapes your eye contact, your tone, your micro-expressions, your posture. It shows up in how you listen, how you respond to pressure, how you treat people who can't offer you anything. People pick up on it because people are wired to read energy. It's how we survived as a species long before we had language. We don't just hear each other. We feel each other. And when someone walks into a room with a mind that is organized, focused, calm, confident, people feel it. They don't need credentials. They don't need to be sold. They simply know. This is what creates natural influence. Not persuasion, not manipulation, but energetic alignment. It's why someone like Warren Buffett, a man who does not scream, who does not posture, who does not demand attention, can move entire markets with a few calm, deliberate words. Because his mindset has become synonymous with steadiness. It's why someone like Maya Angelou, with a voice no louder than anyone else's, commanded rooms of power, because her presence came from a mind that had already wrestled with its own darkness and come out the other side as light. You don't need to raise your voice when your presence speaks louder. And your presence will only speak loudly when your mindset is fully aligned. But alignment requires brutal honesty. You have to confront the noise. You have to audit your thoughts. You have to get under the surface and ask, what are the patterns I'm repeating? What are the beliefs I'm still living by that I didn't choose? Who am I when things don't go my way? Because your mindset is not defined by how you think when everything is working. It's defined by how you respond when everything is not. When the deal falls through. When the plan breaks. When the audience doesn't clap. When you are alone with your thoughts and the outcome hasn't arrived. Can you still stay calm? Can you still choose clarity? Can you still act with intention? That's when influence is either earned or lost. So no, mindset is not about affirmations and ambition quotes. It's about ownership. Ownership over your internal world. Ownership over your reactions. Ownership over your emotional patterns. Because once you own your internal reality, you begin to shape external reality, not by controlling it, but by leading it. You cannot control what happens, but you can control how you interpret it, how you respond to it, what meaning you assign to it. That is where influence begins, in the quiet, invisible moment where your mind decides what is happening for you, not to you. And when that becomes your baseline, not a motivational mood, but your mental operating system, people feel it. They trust it. They gravitate toward it. Because the world is chaotic, uncertain, filled with noise, and people are desperate for someone who is not. You must become that someone. Not through pretending, but through practice. Through inner calibration. Through the daily discipline of training your mind not to react to every external shift, but to lead through it with presence and power. That is mindset. That is leadership. That is the internal climate people trust without knowing why. Chapter 3, Belief, the silent authority that shapes every room you enter. Before you speak, before you move, before you're even fully seen, people are already feeling you. They are registering your energy, interpreting your posture, picking up signals from your tone, your eyes, your presence. And those signals are not controlled by your words or your image. They are controlled by your beliefs. Beliefs are not abstract. They are not ideas floating somewhere in your head waiting to be thought. Beliefs are lived. They are worn. They are felt. They form the atmosphere around you like heat rising from flame. And if your beliefs about yourself, about others, about reality itself are fragmented, hesitant, or weak, people feel that weakness before you say a word. Belief is the silent authority that walks into the room before your reputation ever does. It's what gives your presence gravity, or makes it forgettable. It's not about what you're saying, it's what you deeply believe about yourself while you're saying it. People don't follow potential. They follow certainty. They don't follow hype. They follow embodiment. And that embodiment begins with belief, not fake, not fragile, Not the kind of belief that collapses under criticism or delay, but real belief, forged through adversity, tested in silence, and proven through action. Every leader, every influential figure in history, was first a believer in something the world could not yet see. Not just in an idea, but in themselves as the vessel of that idea. Think of Edison, burning through thousands of failed experiments not because he knew he'd succeed, but because he believed it was possible. Think of Harriet Tubman, guiding people through forests and swamps in the dead of night, hunted by armed men, not because she had a plan for every step, but because her belief in freedom, in her own role as a liberator, was non-negotiable. Belief gave them clarity. Clarity gave them courage. Courage gave them presence. And presence shaped reality. You see, people are not influenced by your arguments, they are influenced by your identity. And your identity is shaped entirely by what you believe to be true about yourself. If you believe you're worthy, powerful, resourceful, that belief gives rise to a frequency. You don't have to say it. You become it. And people trust what you've become. But if deep down you believe you're not ready, not good enough, not deserving, then no matter how compelling your words are, people will feel the fracture. Because we don't respond to surface. We respond to source. And that source, your belief system, is not fixed. It is a construct. A narrative. A story you've repeated so many times that your body began to treat it as fact. And until you update that story, you will keep creating the same experiences over and over again. That's the truth most people never confront. They think belief is something that happens to them, something they'll finally gain once they see results. But belief doesn't follow evidence. Belief creates evidence. It sets the filter of your perception. It trains your brain what to focus on, what to ignore, what to interpret as confirmation of your self-concept. Your subconscious mind does not care about truth. It cares about consistency. It will fight to maintain the beliefs you've repeated, even if those beliefs are destroying your potential. Because to the subconscious, comfort is more important than growth. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar power. That's why most people unconsciously defend the very beliefs that hold them back. Beliefs that were implanted by culture, by family, by trauma. Beliefs that once protected them, but now imprison them. And until those beliefs are upgraded, no amount of talent, charisma, or opportunity can override the signal they're sending into the world. So the question is not whether you believe. You already do. The real question is, what have you chosen to believe, and does that belief deserve to keep directing your life? Every room you walk into is a mirror. It reflects back to you your dominant belief about who you are. If you believe you're unworthy, people respond with doubt or dismissal. If you believe you're a leader, people look to you for direction. If you believe your voice carries weight, people begin to listen. It's not about their perception, it's about the signal you're broadcasting through your own. And that signal is not subtle. It's energetic. It shapes tone, posture, timing, decision. It determines whether people lean in or pull away. Belief is not passive. It is generative. It creates confidence. It fuels discipline. It attracts support. It calibrates your presence in real time. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to announce it. The room will know. Because belief speaks before you do. And the most powerful belief you can hold, the one that transcends all strategy and surpasses all technique, is this: I belong in every room I enter because I bring value the world cannot get from anyone else. Not as arrogance. As fact. A fact rooted not in ego, but in responsibility. Because when you truly believe in your value, you stop performing. You stop chasing. You stop needing validation. And in that space, you become the kind of presence that others feel safe to follow. Because you are no longer negotiating with yourself. This is what the greats understood. Carnegie didn't build his empire by asking permission. Disney didn't dream small to avoid judgment. Lincoln didn't lead with consensus. They believed in something before anyone else could see it, and they paid the price for that belief through isolation, through ridicule, through loss. But they stayed the course. Because belief gave them backbone. And that backbone, more than any tactic, is what commanded trust. It's what made them followable. You must ask yourself, What are you asking others to believe when you have not yet fully believed in yourself? Are you trying to convince the world of a story you haven't yet owned in your bones? Because people don't follow those who are still seeking confirmation. They follow those who have decided. And once you've decided, truly, completely, that belief changes your tone. It changes your walk. It changes what you tolerate, what you pursue, what you radiate. And people trust that change. Because it's real. Influence begins when you no longer outsource your belief to external conditions. When you no longer wait for applause to feel validated or results to feel empowered. When your belief in your path, your mission, your voice becomes so internalized that the world cannot help but reflect it back to you. Not because you demanded it, but because you became it. And once that belief is embodied, leadership becomes effortless. Not because it's easy, but because it's natural. You stop pushing. You start attracting. You stop convincing. You start commanding. Not through force, but through alignment. Because belief, real belief, is not loud. It's undeniable. Chapter 4, Clarity, the magnetic force that silences doubt before it speaks. Clarity is not just understanding what you want. It's not just having a plan or knowing your next step. Clarity is a force. A magnetic, anchoring, undeniable force that makes hesitation impossible to follow. It is the energy that walks ahead of your words, the signal that says, without ever having to say it, this person knows where they're going. And in a world where most people are lost in fog, distracted, divided, unsure of their direction, clarity becomes power. It becomes trust. It becomes the reason people lean in without knowing why, because deep down, every human is searching for someone who seems to see further than they do. The most influential people in history were not always the smartest, the most talented, or the most connected. But they were clear. Clear in mission. Clear in values. Clear in voice. They didn't need to be perfect. They didn't need everyone's agreement. But they could not be mistaken for someone confused about who they were or what they stood for. That kind of clarity doesn't just inform, it transforms. It turns leadership from effort into gravity. It silences critics before they speak, because conviction radiates a frequency that makes skepticism feel irrelevant. Clarity cuts through noise. It organizes chaos. It gives people something to hold on to in the storm. When others are reactive, confused, unsure, the clear-minded person becomes the compass. They are not always the loudest, but they are always the most certain. And certainty is contagious. Not the kind of false bravado that masks insecurity, but the quiet, grounded confidence that comes from internal alignment. When you are clear, you don't need to overpower people, you simply move forward, and the path you create becomes visible to others who have been waiting for direction they couldn't find within themselves. But here's what most people misunderstand. Clarity is not something you stumble upon. It is not a product of luck or external feedback. It is a product of deliberate reflection. It is a byproduct of solitude, of rigorous honesty, of courageous decision-making. You cannot be clear if you are constantly chasing approval, constantly adjusting your identity based on what the world finds acceptable. Clarity demands that you stop performing and start deciding who you are, what you value, and what you will no longer tolerate. It demands that you stop playing both sides of your potential and choose a lane with conviction. You do not become clear by waiting. You become clear by cutting away what is not essential. That means walking away from opportunities that don't align. That means saying no even when saying yes might feel easier. That means silencing the noise of 1,000 external opinions and tuning into the voice that's been trying to guide you since before the world told you who to be. That voice is not loud. It does not argue. But it is always right. And the more you follow it, the more magnetic you become. Because clarity is felt. It's not a pitch. It's not a brand. It's not a speech. It's a frequency that communicates, on a level beneath words, that you are not trying to figure yourself out in real time. You've done the work. You've drawn the lines. You know who you are and who you're not. And that kind of clarity makes people trust you instantly. Because it's rare. Because it's stable. Because most people are searching for someone, anyone, who seems like they actually mean what they say. You've seen it in action. The athlete who walks onto the field with a look in their eye that makes you lean forward in your seat, even before the whistle blows. The entrepreneur who speaks calmly in front of the boardroom, while others scramble for justification. The teacher who walks into a classroom and commands attention without raising her voice. The speaker who doesn't try to sound smart but who says one thing so clearly, so directly, that the whole room goes quiet. That's clarity. And it's more influential than volume, charm, or intellect combined. Clarity is not about knowing every answer. It's about knowing what matters. It's about cutting through options with precision. It's about walking into uncertainty and still being able to say, "This is the direction. Follow me." And people will. Because human beings are biologically wired to follow leaders who are more certain than they are. That's not manipulation. That's evolutionary psychology. In times of uncertainty, we look for signals of stability. And clarity, true, embodied clarity, is the most trustworthy signal of all. But clarity is not something you borrow. It's not something you fake. It's not something you paste on the surface of a shaky foundation. It must be built, tested. And that testing happens in the quiet hours, when you're alone, when no one's watching, when you're staring at the mirror and deciding whether you'll live by your values or just talk about them. It happens in the tough calls, the hard boundaries, the moments when compromise would be easier but alignment matters more. And here's the truth. You cannot lead others into clarity until you've walked through the fire of confusion yourself. You cannot help others make decisions if you're still living in indecision. You cannot be trusted if your mind is still negotiating your own worth. You must become ruthless about your direction. Not rigid, not closed off, but grounded in a vision so clear that it organizes everything around it. That kind of clarity becomes irresistible, because people crave it. In a world designed to distract, a clear mind is a revolutionary act. You don't need to know every step. You just need to stop lying to yourself about the next one. You don't need to have a 5-year plan. You just need to stop tolerating what makes you feel smaller. And when you do, when you cut through the noise, the fear, the false narratives, what remains is a version of you that others want to follow. Not because you told them to, but because your clarity created space for their own. That is influence. That is leadership. That is clarity. Chapter 5. Vision. The energy people follow even before they understand it. Vision is not a slogan. It is not a marketing sentence crafted to inspire temporary motivation. It is not an empty promise carved into the side of a website or printed in gold across an office wall. Vision is a force, a living, breathing current of intention that exists before the plan, before the strategy, before the world understands what you're building. It is the unseen blueprint that guides your decisions, anchors your values, and bends reality into form long before the results show up. Vision is not an accessory. It is the operating system. It is the reason you wake up early, work when no one's watching, speak when it's easier to stay quiet, and act when there's no immediate reward in sight. Vision is the fuel that outlasts fatigue. And more than anything, it's the energy people feel when they look at you and somehow, without needing the whole story, know they want to follow. Real vision doesn't just describe a future. It makes the future feel inevitable. When a leader carries true vision, it radiates through every word they speak, every silence they hold, every risk they take. It is not a dream, it is a decision. A contract written in the invisible fabric of their identity that says, "I will see this through whether or not you believe, whether or not you support me, whether or not the world gives me permission." That kind of vision cannot be faked. It cannot be downloaded or delegated. It must be forged internally, from pain, from clarity, from longing, from the deep awareness that you were not born to recycle reality, but to rebuild it. People don't follow what you're doing, they follow why you're doing it. And more importantly, they follow how you hold the vision when things fall apart. Anyone can speak boldly when everything is going well. Anyone can paint a picture of the future when momentum is strong and support is everywhere. But true influence is measured by how you carry the vision in the dark, when no one's listening, when doubt is loud, when nothing around you looks like progress. Do you still speak from conviction? Do you still make decisions aligned with your highest outcome? Or do you shrink your vision to match your current circumstances? Because here's what most people never understand. People are not inspired by comfort. They are moved by courage. They are drawn to the one who sees the future not as a wish, but as a choice. They are pulled toward the one who refuses to lower the ceiling just because others are afraid of heights. Vision becomes influence when it becomes unshakable. When it's no longer just something you believe in, it's something you've become. When it governs not just what you hope for, but who you are, how you move, what you tolerate, and what you reject. Walt Disney didn't build a company. He broadcast a frequency. He saw an experience so clearly in his mind that even when investors mocked him, even when money dried up, even when animators walked away, he never stopped believing. Not because he had proof, but because he was the proof. The parks, the films, the legacy, all of it was born not from resources, but from a vision carried with such intensity that the world eventually had to conform. That is the power of vision. It makes the impossible feel overdue. And the more clearly you hold it, the more the world begins to organize itself around your belief. Doors open that once seemed sealed. People arrive who once ignored you. Resources shift in your direction, not because you chased them, but because you stood still in purpose long enough for them to find you. That is what vision does. It attracts. It leads. It magnetizes. And it's not about being the loudest or the most talented. It's about being the most aligned with a future so clear, so precise, so fully embodied that people begin to believe in it before it exists. Vision creates movement. Not just externally, but internally. It restructures your habits. It refines your decisions. It burns away distractions and excuses and the seductive comfort of compromise. When your vision is real, your life begins to organize itself around what matters most. You stop needing external accountability because your future self is holding you accountable. You stop living in reaction and start moving in direction. You stop asking for permission and start operating from destiny. But vision must be cultivated. It must be fed. It must be guarded. Because the world will constantly try to water it down. People will project their own limitations onto your imagination. They will question your sanity, mock your ambition, challenge your path. Not because your vision is wrong, but because it threatens the smallness they've made peace with. And in those moments, you must choose. Shrink your vision to fit their fear, or expand your leadership to match your calling. Your ability to hold vision is your responsibility. It is not something you do for applause. It is something you do for alignment. And that alignment, when held consistently, will give rise to trust that cannot be bought, duplicated, or fabricated. It will make people feel something before they even understand why. That's influence. Not because you manipulated, but because you embodied. So the question is not, do you have a vision? The question is, does your vision own you? Does it drive you? Reshape you? Stretch you? Or is it just a sentence in your journal, a phrase in your business plan, a someday maybe idea collecting dust? Because the vision that changes the world is not written. It's lived. It's felt. It's carried with such unrelenting clarity that others can't help but feel it too, long before the results, the proof, the payoff. If you want people to trust you, if you want people to follow you, if you want to build something that outlives the moment, then stop talking about the future and start becoming it. Right now. In how you think. In how you show up. In how you speak, how you decide, how you move. Because when you live as if your vision is already true, the world begins to believe you. And that is the beginning of real influence. Chapter 6, Purpose, the fire behind every word that moves people. Purpose is not a tagline. It is not a personal mission statement you craft once and forget. It is not a sanitized statement you put on a website to sound noble or aligned. Purpose is not a career path or a niche or something you eventually find. Purpose is something far more primal, far more permanent, far more explosive. It is fire, raw, unrelenting, and sacred. It is the force that gives weight to your voice, gravity to your presence, and momentum to every choice you make. It is not something you say. It's something people feel when they hear you speak, when they watch how you move, when they notice the way you show up consistently, especially when there's no applause. You can't borrow purpose. You can't imitate it. You can't reverse engineer it from someone else's path. You have to earn it through brutal honesty. Through asking yourself questions that strip away the layers of performance and reveal the bones of your soul. Who are you when everything you've built is taken away? What would still drive you if no one ever noticed, if no one ever clapped, if there was no reward other than the doing of the thing itself? That's purpose. Purpose is not tied to outcome. It's tied to meaning. It's the deeper that never stops burning, even when everything on the outside falls apart. When you speak from purpose, people know. Even if they disagree, even if they can't explain it, they feel it. Because purpose carries resonance. It bypasses resistance. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to dominate the room. It simply radiates with such conviction that it makes other people's indecision feel like a betrayal of their own potential. That's the power of someone who is purpose-aligned. They don't have to convince. They convict. Not with force. With fire. But purpose doesn't show up when life is easy. It doesn't arrive wrapped in clarity and comfort. It reveals itself in the chaos, in the breakdowns, in the moments you want to quit but don't. It lives in the questions that don't go away. In the work you're drawn to even when it doesn't make sense. In the impact you want to make, even if you never get credit for it. Purpose is born through friction. Through silence. Through paying attention to the things that move you, anger you, break your heart, and pull you forward anyway. Carnegie didn't build steel to make money. He used money to move the world. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't speak to be famous. He spoke because injustice violated something at the core of his being that would not be silenced. Every great movement, invention, disruption, revolution was driven not by strategy alone, but by purpose so deep, so personal, so utterly essential to the identity of its originator that compromise was impossible. This is what makes a leader magnetic. Not status. Not followers. Not credentials. But purpose that is felt, alive, breathing, burning through every word, every decision, every act of leadership. You cannot fake this. You cannot mimic it. Because purpose leaves fingerprints on everything it touches. It shows up in how you treat the person with no power. It shows up in what you do when nobody's watching. It shows up in the ideas you keep returning to, no matter how many times you try to rationalize your way out of them. Purpose is what gives your influence weight. You can have charisma, intellect, energy, but if it's not anchored in purpose, it evaporates the moment people feel pressure, feel doubt, feel risk. Purpose is what makes you stay. It's what people unconsciously check for when they decide whether to follow you or not. They're not asking if you're smart. They're asking if you're for real. Do you actually believe what you say? Are you living it? Would you still be doing this if it cost you everything? Because when you're purpose-driven, your actions don't require permission. They don't rely on consensus. You are not navigating life like a politician trying to appease everyone. You are moving through it like an architect building what only you can see. And yes, it will be lonely sometimes. It will be heavy, but it will also be liberating. Because when you find your purpose, and more importantly, own it, you stop needing a script. You stop asking the world who you're allowed to be. You stop negotiating with your mission. And people feel that. They trust that. Because they're surrounded by performance. They're surrounded by influence built on sand, on marketing tricks, on trends, on identity borrowed from someone else's highlight reel. But when they encounter someone built on purpose, someone who would keep going with or without their attention, someone who speaks with the authority of "I cannot not do this," they listen. They follow. Not because they're being manipulated, but because they recognize something in you that awakens something in them. And that, more than any technique, is what creates real, lasting influence. You don't have to change the world with your purpose. But your purpose should change you. It should challenge you, shape you, evolve you. It should be the reason you walk back into the fire when it would be easier to walk away. It should hold you accountable when the noise is loud and the path is unclear. Purpose gives you courage not because it removes fear, but because it makes fear irrelevant. So if you want to be trusted, if you want to lead, if you want to build influence that outlasts algorithms, platforms, trends, then don't just speak from your mind. Speak from your mission. Don't just show up with talent. Show up with truth. Don't just do what works. Do what's yours, the thing you can't shake, can't fake, can't delegate. The thing that burns through your excuses and reminds you who you really are. Because when your purpose becomes your presence, your influence becomes inevitable. Chapter 7. Discipline, the invisible engine that builds unshakable presence. Discipline is the hidden force behind every presence that commands respect without saying a word. It is the invisible architecture beneath confidence, the real reason certain people seem untouchable, not because they're arrogant or special, but because they've become dependable to themselves. Discipline is not about rigidity. It's not about punishing yourself or living in constant restriction. Real discipline is alignment. It's choosing your actions not based on your mood, but based on your mission. It is the decision to be consistent with who you say you are, even on the days when no one is watching and nothing external is rewarding you for it. People can feel your discipline. Not because you announce your routines or parade your productivity, but because there is something different in the way you move. A quiet structure, a solidness in your decisions, a lack of chaos in your energy. In a world addicted to the dopamine of distraction, true discipline becomes power. And not just personal power, relational power. Because people don't trust the loudest person in the room. They trust the most stable. The one who can be counted on to show up, stay grounded, remain intentional, no matter the pressure, the chaos, or the temptation to abandon the path for the comfort of momentary escape. Look at the people we remember. The ones who changed industries, rewrote culture, led revolutions. None of them were casual. None of them coasted. None of them drifted into greatness through passion alone. They were disciplined. Relentlessly so. Ford didn't create mass production by thinking about it once in a while. He systemized it. He lived it. His standards became industry standards. Kobe Bryant didn't become legendary because he had talent. Millions of people have talent. He became Kobe because at 4 a.m., when the city slept, he was already on the court, refining the smallest things the world would never see, not for applause, but for integrity. Discipline is not about motivation. It's about identity. If you have to wait to feel like doing the thing, then your commitment isn't real. Discipline means you do it because it's who you are, not because you feel inspired in the moment. And when you reach that level of identity-based discipline, something incredible happens. Your energy becomes consistent. Your presence becomes sharp. People feel that you're not moved by distraction or derailed by emotion. And that makes you someone they can lean on, follow, trust. Because trust, at its core, is about predictability. Can I trust that you'll be the same person under pressure? Can I trust that your values won't evaporate when it's inconvenient to uphold them? Can I trust that your character will remain intact when it costs you something to keep it? That trust is not built in the spotlight. It's built in private. Through the invisible decisions you make each day when no one will ever know but you. Discipline is the bridge between the internal and the external. Between what you believe and what you actually do. It is the translation of your vision into behavior. And without that bridge, your influence remains potential energy, impressive in theory, but weightless in action. You cannot lead anyone further than your own level of self-leadership. If your habits are inconsistent, your energy will be inconsistent. And if your energy is inconsistent, your influence will never compound. People may like you. They may admire you. But they will not follow you, not deeply, not sustainably, because they won't be able to count on you. And in the moments that matter most, that's what leadership requires. Not charisma. Not performance. Stability. The ability to hold your own frequency when everyone else is losing theirs. The ability to show up with the same conviction and clarity whether the room is cheering for you or doubting you. That kind of leadership doesn't come from inspiration. It comes from discipline, from thousands of unseen choices that stack on top of each other to build something unshakable inside you. Discipline is freedom. Not because it feels good in the moment, but because it liberates you from the emotional roller coaster most people live on. When you are disciplined, you no longer need to be rescued by motivation. You no longer need to rely on willpower. You've built systems, rituals, internal contracts that guide you no matter how you feel. And that consistency becomes magnetic. Because in a world full of talkers, dreamers, wishers, the one who executes becomes irreplaceable. But let's be honest, discipline is boring. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy. It doesn't give you a dopamine hit or make you feel accomplished right away. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It's hard. And that's exactly why it's powerful. Because most people won't do it. Most people want the result, but not the refinement. They want the impact, but not the repetition. But the people who are most trusted, most respected, most followed, are the ones who understand that what they do when it's boring matters more than what they do when they feel inspired. You want to command presence? Be the one who doesn't flinch. Be the one whose energy doesn't spike and crash depending on the mood of the room. Be the one who doesn't need constant affirmation to stay in motion. That kind of person is rare. That kind of person is disciplined. And people follow that kind of person, not because they're flashy, but because they're real. Because they've built something inside themselves the world didn't give them and can't take away. Discipline builds that. It forges internal certainty. It trains your nervous system to operate from intention, not reactivity. And over time, it becomes more than a habit. It becomes a signal. A frequency that people trust, even if they can't articulate why. That's why you must protect your standards. Not just because they affect your results, but because they define your presence. Every time you lower your standard to please someone, to fit in, to avoid discomfort, you dilute your energy. You weaken the signal. But every time you show up, do the work, honor the discipline, even when no one sees it, you sharpen your edge. You increase your gravity. You deepen your influence. Because the world doesn't need more performers. It needs more pillars. People who can be counted on. People whose words mean something. People who follow through. And if you want to be that, if you want to lead that way, then stop waiting for permission and start training your presence, one disciplined decision at a time. That is where real trust begins. That is where influence is built. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, where discipline becomes identity. Chapter 8, Action. The signal that separates leaders from talkers. Action is the final language. The moment where all your beliefs, your vision, your mindset, your purpose, either translate into movement or vanish into theory. It's what people are watching for whether they admit it or not. They don't care what you plan to do, what you hope to build, what you're inspired by. They care whether or not you move. Not once. Not occasionally. But consistently, decisively, courageously. Because in a world addicted to posturing, action has become rare, and therefore, priceless. You can say all the right things, embody the right image, speak in the tone of someone who appears driven, but if your life isn't moving, if your decisions don't align with your declarations, people will feel it. Because humans are not influenced by potential, they are influenced by proof. And the only proof that matters is what you do when it's time to act. You can dress up indecision with as many rationalizations as you like. You can hide behind more research, better timing, waiting for clarity, or analyzing one more variable. But all of it, every excuse, every delay, every self-protective pause, reads the same to the people watching. This person doesn't fully believe in what they're saying. And if you don't believe it enough to act, why should anyone believe it enough to follow? The world is full of experts who never ship, visionaries who never build, strategists who never move. And we've grown numb to their words. Because we've seen enough to know that talk, no matter how eloquent, means nothing without execution. Action is the filter. It's what separates the ones who wish from the ones who create, the ones who dream from the ones who lead. Action is what calibrates your influence. It's what sharpens your identity. It's what tells the truth about what you actually value. You can say you want impact, but if you spend your energy avoiding risk, your actions betray your words. You can say you want change, but if you keep choosing comfort, your decisions expose your real priorities. What you do is who you are. Not what you hope to become. Not what you intend to do when things feel easier. Not what you think about endlessly but never commit to. In every moment, your actions are telling the world, and yourself, a story about your leadership. And people are listening. Whether they speak it out loud or not, they are forming conclusions about whether to trust you, follow you, align with you, based not on what you say, but on what they see you do. Real leaders don't wait to feel ready. They move because the movement is what generates readiness. They don't wait for permission. They act because they are driven by something stronger than approval, something deeper than fear. They understand that hesitation sends a message, not just to others, but to their own psyche. Every time you hesitate in the face of something that matters, you teach your nervous system that safety is more important than growth. Every time you delay action on something that is aligned, you reinforce the belief that you can't be trusted with your own momentum. And that erosion of trust, not from others, but from yourself, is what quietly kills influence. Because influence doesn't start with external attention. It starts with self-respect. And nothing builds self-respect faster than decisive, courageous action. Think of the people who've moved you most, the leaders who shaped culture, the innovators who built legacies, the artists who broke through. What you remember is not just their message, but their movement. Steve Jobs didn't influence the world with ideas. He acted. He built. He shipped. He got rejected and he built again. Oprah didn't create global trust because she talked about purpose. She lived it, daily, in action, on stages, on screens, behind the scenes. Lincoln didn't unite a fractured nation through theory. He risked everything, acted through resistance, and stood firm in moments that demanded unimaginable resolve. Their actions became their message. Their movement became their influence. Not because they were perfect, but because they moved through imperfection with clarity and commitment. Action is not about productivity. It's not about being busy. It's not about checking off lists or chasing 1,000 low-value goals. It's about aligned movement, deliberate, clear, purposeful motion in the direction of what matters most. When you move from alignment, your energy sharpens. Your words begin to carry more weight. People start to lean in because they sense that you are becoming the thing you speak about. Not someday, not eventually, but now. That's why we follow action takers. Not because they always succeed, but because they're doing what most people won't. They're showing what belief looks like in real time. And that show, that visceral, visible proof, is the foundation of trust. But the greatest shift happens internally. When you act in alignment with who you say you are, you stop needing external validation. You stop second-guessing. You stop living in the theoretical future and begin creating real momentum in the now. Confidence is no longer a mood. It becomes a memory, something your body remembers from the times you moved through fear instead of waiting for it to leave. Every time you take aligned action, you reinforce the belief that you are the kind of person who follows through. And that belief becomes your edge. That edge becomes your presence. And that presence, far more than any script or strategy, is what earns you the right to lead. If you want to influence people, don't just explain what you believe. Show them what it looks like to live it. If you want to be trusted, stop announcing your intentions and start letting your movement speak for itself. Action is louder than persuasion. It is more convincing than argument. It is more contagious than charisma. In every room, at every level, people are watching to see, will you act when it's uncomfortable? Will you act when no one supports you? Will you act when the outcome is uncertain? Because if you do, if you consistently choose to move from clarity and commitment rather than fear and waiting, your action will say everything people need to hear about who you are. And once they see that, they'll follow. Chapter 9. Gratitude, the quiet authority that elevates every room you enter. Gratitude is not weakness. It is not soft. It is not some sentimental detour from ambition. It is power. It is presence. It is the rarest form of awareness that separates those who chase life endlessly from those who command it with grounded strength. Gratitude is not passive. It is a form of leadership. It is the deliberate choice to stand inside the moment with full ownership, to recognize value where most people see lack, to see abundance in places others overlook, to choose meaning before the world hands you results. And in doing so, gratitude transforms your energy. It elevates the room before you speak. It shifts your presence from scarcity to certainty, not because you have everything, but because you've remembered how much you already are. When you walk into a room with true gratitude, not performative, not curated, not posted for likes, but the kind of gratitude that radiates from the fact that you are deeply in touch with the miracle of being here, people notice. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. There is a quiet assurance in you. An emotional intelligence that communicates, I'm not here to take. I'm here to contribute. I'm not looking for validation. I already know my value. I'm not posturing for worth. I'm rooted in it. And that kind of presence, one that does not vibrate with desperation or hidden agendas, earns a level of trust that cannot be replicated by charm, intellect, or force. Gratitude recalibrates your nervous system. It softens your defensiveness. It dismantles entitlement. It brings you back to the simple truth that everything you think you have was never truly yours. Your health, your opportunities, your ideas, your breath, all of it borrowed, all of it fleeting, and all of it available to be honored rather than demanded. That awareness doesn't make you passive. It makes you powerful. Because the person who doesn't feel owed by life no longer reacts from ego. They respond from depth. They're harder to offend, harder to shake, harder to manipulate, because their energy is no longer wired to seek. It is grounded in what already is. In leadership, this matters more than most people realize. Gratitude creates psychological safety. When people feel that you see them, that you value what they bring, that your energy is not rooted in superiority but in appreciation, they lower their guard. They open. They listen. They connect. And connection is what allows influence to take root. No one follows someone who only radiates lack. No one truly trusts someone whose entire presence is built around what they don't have, who they haven't become yet, or what they still need to prove. But someone who leads from gratitude, from wholeness, from reverence, becomes magnetic. Not because they need anything, but because they remind people what wholeness actually feels like. This is not abstract. You felt it. You've been around people who had less than you, but whose gratitude made them richer. You've watched them handle stress with grace. You've seen how they acknowledge others without calculation. You've noticed how they stay composed in moments where others react. That's not luck. That's not personality. That's the product of an inner decision to live from appreciation rather than expectation, to show up every day with a mindset that says, I may not control everything, but I can honor this moment, this process, this path. Gratitude also sharpens your awareness. When you're grateful, you see what others miss. You recognize effort. You celebrate small wins. You notice detail. And that makes you a better communicator, a better decision maker, a better leader, because you are attuned not just to outcomes, but to the process behind everything. Gratitude turns noise into signal. It cuts through urgency and teaches you how to breathe, how to listen, how to pay attention. And in a world where most people are reacting out of fear or desire, the person who responds with calm presence instantly becomes someone others trust. But let's be clear, real gratitude isn't just about being thankful when things go well. That's easy. Anyone can feel grateful when they're winning, when they're being praised, when results arrive. Real gratitude is forged in adversity. It's born in those moments when you've been overlooked, challenged, doubted, and you still find something to appreciate. It's the ability to stand in uncertainty and choose to honor the lesson before you've even seen the reward. It's the discipline to find meaning in pain, to recognize growth in discomfort, to say, this too is part of what's shaping me, and to mean it. That is where true leadership begins, when gratitude becomes your baseline, not your reaction. It is that baseline that makes you powerful. Because once you no longer need life to constantly deliver proof of your value, you stop shrinking. You stop waiting. You stop needing applause or reassurance. You begin to lead not from performance, but from truth. And that truth, reinforced daily through the lens of gratitude, becomes your internal compass. It humbles you when you rise. It grounds you when you fall. It elevates your tone, your words, your decisions, because every step is taken from awareness, not entitlement. And people follow that. They crave that. They may not tell you, but they feel safer around it. Because we are all navigating a world that constantly tries to convince us we are lacking. When someone shows up as whole, grateful, grounded, steady, it is like oxygen. It is rare. It is real. And it is trustworthy. Gratitude, then, is not the softest voice in the room. It is the strongest. Because it is the one that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove, doesn't need to dominate. It simply stands there, present, aware, aligned, and in doing so, changes the emotional tone of the entire environment. This is how you lead. With presence, not pressure. With appreciation, not need. With gratitude, not ego. And when you live that way, when gratitude becomes not something you remember occasionally, but the foundation of your presence, your influence expands without force. Your leadership deepens without effort. And your life begins to radiate a trustworthiness that no title, no tactic, no branding can ever manufacture. Chapter 10. Adaptability. The quiet intelligence that makes you unstoppable. Adaptability is not just a skill. It is not something you learn once and apply occasionally. It is an ongoing recalibration of power, an internal intelligence that doesn't break when the plan breaks, doesn't freeze when the environment shifts, doesn't collapse when expectations aren't met. Adaptability is presence in motion. It is strength without rigidity. It is clarity without stubbornness. It is the difference between the person who leads for a moment and the one who becomes a force over time. Because anyone can look impressive when everything goes as planned. But real leadership, lasting, trusted, influential leadership, is measured by how you move when the map burns, when the floor shifts, when the path disappears and the only thing left is your capacity to adjust without losing your core. People trust adaptable leaders because they can sense something most don't articulate. This person is not emotionally dependent on the world staying still. They are not fragile. They don't panic when things get unpredictable. They don't collapse under pressure or drown in disappointment. They observe. They assess. They pivot with intelligence, not desperation. And in a time when the world is moving faster than ever, when change is the new constant and certainty is a myth sold by outdated minds, that kind of fluid strength becomes magnetic. It becomes influence, not because it's perfect, but because it's reliable. Adaptability isn't about lowering your standards. It's not about giving up when things don't go your way. It's about knowing the difference between what is essential and what is just preference. The goal can stay the same. The mission can remain sacred. But the method must remain flexible. Because the world will not conform to your ideal conditions. People will change. Markets will shift. Opportunities will appear and vanish. And the person who needs control, who needs their plan to unfold exactly as imagined, who clings to certainty as their emotional oxygen, that person will break, not because they lack talent, but because they lacked the maturity to evolve in real time. To lead, you must become liquid, adaptive, fluid, responsive, not reactive, but agile. You must learn to love the unexpected. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's honest. Because real growth rarely arrives on schedule. Because the next version of you will only emerge in the space where your old patterns stop working. And in that moment, when the script goes blank, when the tools you trusted no longer deliver, when your plans meet the raw edge of reality, that is where adaptability is born. Not from theory, but from necessity. Not from comfort, but from clarity. Look at nature. Look at the most powerful systems on Earth. Rivers, forests, weather patterns, ecosystems. They don't resist change. They adapt to it. They use it. They reorganize themselves in response to pressure. And because of that, they last. Meanwhile, brittle things shatter. Fixed things perish. Rigid systems collapse under the weight of their own predictability. That same law applies to you, your mind, your presence, your influence. If you are married to one way, one belief, one strategy, one identity, you will crumble. Not because you were wrong, but because you weren't flexible enough to remain relevant. Adaptability is intelligence in motion. It is humility in action. It is the refusal to pretend that control is power and the wisdom to understand that response is the real authority. The more you practice it, the more powerful you become. Because you begin to lead from a place beyond fear. A place where you trust your ability to move, not just your ability to plan. And people feel that. They feel when you are not shaken by the unknown. They feel when you are not emotionally fused to a single outcome. And that steadiness, that calm in the eye of chaos, is what earns you the right to be followed. Think of the innovators, the great builders, the cultural disruptors. They were not the best because they had the best plan. They were the best because when the plan broke, and it always breaks, they didn't shrink. They didn't mourn the loss of what could have been. They stepped into the moment and listened. They adapted. They rebuilt. And they did it without making their identity a hostage of the process. That's how you keep moving forward, by learning how to evolve without losing yourself, by holding your vision tightly and your methods loosely, by knowing that true strength is not measured by how forcefully you resist change, but by how effortlessly you absorb it and convert it into momentum. This is not just about business or achievement. It's about emotional agility. The person who is adaptable emotionally, who doesn't spiral when their expectations are unmet, who can reframe disappointment into data, who doesn't panic when relationships shift or roles change, that person becomes trustworthy on a different level. Because in every relationship, personal or professional, the real question is this: can you meet change without losing your integrity? Can you stay grounded when circumstances evolve? Can you remain open without becoming aimless? Can you be decisive without being dogmatic? Adaptability answers that question with presence, with action, with a posture that says, I don't need perfect conditions to keep becoming. I don't need the wind to blow in my favor to move forward. I will adjust the sails. I will read the moment. I will bend without breaking, and in doing so, I will become something the rigid will never understand: resilient, relevant, and real. That is influence. Not because it's always right, but because it's ready. Chapter 11. Resilience, the quiet echo of a mind that refuses to break. Resilience is not endurance for its own sake. It is not the romanticization of suffering or the blind worship of hardship. It is the decision, often silent, often unseen, to continue forward with power and integrity when everything around you would justify collapse. It's not about brute force or pretending that nothing hurts. It's about responding to pain without becoming the pain. It's about carrying pressure, rejection, betrayal, failure, not with theatrical defiance but with a kind of inner gravity that communicates, without the need for explanation, that you will not be moved. That your identity is not up for negotiation just because circumstances became inconvenient. That your path still belongs to you even when every possible obstacle has declared war on your progress. True resilience is not loud. It is not decorated with slogans or plastered across timelines. It is quiet. It is personal. It is forged not in victory, but in valleys, the emotional trenches where your self-belief is tested against silence, time, and the gnawing doubt that maybe, just maybe, it was all for nothing. It's in those hours, not the ones filled with praise or applause, but the ones soaked in solitude and decision, that resilience becomes real. Because you have to decide to move forward not with the guarantee of reward, but with the clarity of who you are without reward. That's the kind of identity that builds gravitational trust. Because the people around you may not have your vision, may not carry your discipline, may not feel your sense of mission, but they can feel your refusal to fold. You must understand that people do not trust those who appear invincible. They trust those who prove they can bleed without quitting. They trust those who walk through fire without trying to hide the heat. Because perfection doesn't inspire. Presence does. Real presence. The kind that says, I've been hit. I've been doubted. I've been bent and burned and dragged through hell, and still I'm here. Not as a victim. Not as a martyr. But as a force. Not because I never broke, but because I rebuilt. Because I got back up. Because I used every scar as instruction, every wound as raw material, every setback as a furnace to burn away the ego and build something stronger in its place. That's what makes resilience magnetic. It carries history. When you lead from resilience, your presence is layered. It has depth. It has weight. You don't have to tell people what you've been through. They feel it in the way you speak, in the way you stand, in the way you don't flinch when others do. That kind of presence can't be trained in theory. It must be lived. It must be earned through the breaking, through the moments when the world didn't clap, when progress reversed, when everything logical said, give up, and you didn't. Because when you lead with that kind of history, people feel safe around you, not because you always win, but because they know you will never run. Resilience also rewires your relationship with failure. You stop fearing it. You stop using it as evidence against yourself. You stop treating it like a reflection of your worth. Instead, you start to see it as feedback, not on whether you're good enough, but on what needs to evolve. And the faster you can learn, the less power failure has over you. That's the paradox. Resilient people don't bounce back because they're tougher. They bounce back because they stopped assigning personal identity to temporary outcomes. They know that progress is jagged, that growth isn't linear, and that the presence required to lead through resistance comes not from avoidance of failure, but from its full integration. That integration is what allows you to walk into rooms with presence. You're not rattled by pressure. You're not scanning for approval. You're not threatened by confrontation. Because you've seen worse. You've lived through worse. You've stared down worse and refused to retreat. And that internal archive of survival, of proving to yourself over and over that you're still here, still growing, still building, that becomes your emotional foundation. That becomes your leadership platform. Not your title. Not your wins. But your refusal to exit when it would have been easy to leave. That's what people feel. That's what they trust. That's what they follow. But this is the truth most won't say out loud. Resilience hurts. It asks more of you than is fair. It stretches you when you already feel stretched. It demands energy you don't think you have left. It strips away the illusions you were using to feel safe. And in the process, it reveals who you actually are. Not who you think you are. Not who you hope to be. But who you are when nothing is working. And if you can face that version of yourself and still choose movement, still choose honesty, still choose contribution, that's the moment you stop performing influence and start embodying it. Resilience is a mirror. It shows you whether your mission is real, whether your values are real, whether your identity is rooted in results or in purpose. Because when everything breaks and you still show up, still speak clearly, still act decisively, you're no longer just operating from passion. You're operating from principle. That's what makes people believe in you. That's what makes them stay. Not because they need you to be perfect, but because they need you to be constant. And resilience, real resilience, is constancy under pressure. You cannot learn this in a course. You cannot download it from a mentor. You must walk through it. You must hold your own hand through the seasons that would convince a lesser version of you to bow out. And you must emerge not just intact, but integrated. Not untouched by pain, but unshaken by it. And once you do, your presence changes forever. Because people don't just follow strength. They follow the source of strength. And when they see that your source isn't external, isn't popularity, success, applause, trends, but something deep, tested, permanent, then your influence becomes untouchable. Because resilience isn't about survival. It's about returning stronger. Not harder. Stronger. More conscious. More aligned. More dangerous to mediocrity. More useful to the mission. And more trustworthy to the people watching, waiting, hoping to find someone who has walked through hell and come back not just alive, but awake. Chapter 12. Learning, the final skill that separates lifelong leaders from temporary voices. Learning is not the gathering of information. It is not the accumulation of facts or the mechanical memorization of concepts. Learning, real learning, is the final discipline of the influential. It is the humility to evolve in public, the courage to let your former self be outdated, the relentless refusal to stagnate no matter how much success you've acquired, how much praise you've received, or how many people already follow you. Learning is the internal contract that says, I will not stop becoming. And it is this contract, more than your confidence, more than your charisma, more than your credentials, that will determine whether your influence becomes timeless or temporary. Because people may follow your knowledge for a moment, but they follow your growth for a lifetime. The world does not need more experts who've memorized the past. It needs leaders who are brave enough to outgrow it. It needs people who are constantly shedding outdated beliefs, who can look at their own ideas without ego, who do not fear being wrong but instead fear being stuck. You can only lead to the level you're willing to learn. The moment you believe you've arrived is the moment your relevance begins to die. Because influence is not just what you say, it's the way you model evolution in real time. It's the way you update your mind in public, without shame, without pride, without the need to appear invincible. That kind of openness isn't weakness, it's intellectual power. And the people around you feel it. They feel the difference between someone performing wisdom and someone becoming wiser. The most dangerous ceiling a leader can hit is not exhaustion, it's certainty. The belief that what got you here will always be enough. That your current mindset is the final version. That you've mastered what you need to master. Because the moment you stop being a student, you begin shrinking your own influence. You start defending what should be questioned. You start recycling instead of renewing. And worst of all, you begin to unconsciously train others to do the same, to cling to safety instead of curiosity. But the leaders who truly shift culture, who shape the future, who build trust at scale, they never stop learning. Not because they don't know, but because they know better. They know that mastery is not an arrival. It's a cycle, a rhythm, a way of being. Look at the greatest minds across history. Einstein never stopped challenging the boundaries of his own theories. Da Vinci questioned the limits of human anatomy and artistic technique even in his final years. Benjamin Franklin, a statesman, inventor, philosopher, and entrepreneur, still referred to himself as a learner. Even Socrates, a foundational pillar of modern thought, declared the only thing he truly knew was that he knew nothing. That is not insecurity. That is wisdom. That is the mental posture that creates legacy, not by being louder, but by being open. Open to learn from your peers. Open to learn from your critics. Open to learn from failure, from contradiction, from discomfort, from being proven wrong in front of others. Because every time you learn, your influence gets sharper. Every time you evolve, your words carry more truth. Every time you grow, your leadership becomes less about control and more about contribution. Learning is not always comfortable. It will confront the very ideas that gave you success. It will strip away frameworks you once clung to. It will humiliate the ego that wants to be right more than it wants to be real. But that's the price of continued relevance, to choose growth over validation. To be more committed to becoming than to being seen. And when you do that consistently, people start to feel something rare. They start to see a human being who is not leading from a fixed platform, but from a moving wave, adapting, refining, absorbing, evolving. That is the leader who becomes irreplaceable. Not because they are always the smartest in the room, but because they are always the most awake. Influence is not preserved through status. It's preserved through evolution. You can reach people with a moment of brilliance. But you keep them, you grow them, you move them, you empower them, by showing them that the growth never ends. That there's no finish line to excellence. That the journey inward is infinite, and that curiosity is not a phase but a way of life. This is the secret behind the most enduring leaders. They keep learning because they know the cost of pretending they're done. And that cost is the decay of truth, the erosion of relevance, the slow collapse of trust. People do not need leaders who are always right. They need leaders who are always real. And to be real is to be in motion. To be teachable. To be human. To be willing to ask better questions. To be courageous enough to change your mind. To study new worlds without discarding what worked, but without worshiping it either. To learn not just from books, but from life, from mistakes, from conflict, from culture, from the quiet corners where no one is watching but the lesson is waiting. When you do this, when you lead with learning, your presence becomes dynamic. People feel the energy of someone who is alive in their mind, not regurgitating but discovering, not selling knowledge but sharing exploration. That kind of presence is unforgettable. Because in a world obsessed with image and polish, it gives people permission to return to curiosity. And that permission is power. So if you want to build influence that doesn't fade, if you want to lead people in a way that earns trust and keeps it, if you want to walk into rooms and speak with weight that doesn't come from volume but from evolution, then keep learning. Keep questioning. Keep growing. Let the version of you 5 years from now embarrass the version of you today, not because you were wrong, but because you didn't stop. That is how you lead. That is how you earn the right to speak. That is how you become a voice people listen to, not once, not briefly, but again and again, because they know you are not frozen in old ideas, but flowing in the living current of truth. Because in the end, influence is not a title. It's not a moment. It's not a number. It's a rhythm, a commitment, a posture of constant learning. And that is what makes your presence not just strong, but eternal.